Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Today's story tells of a very troubled husband. Is he? We'll find out in today's story. Enjoy watching it. The object in my hand is small and seems completely harmless. It is less than 12 centimeters long, slightly more than 5 centimeters wide, and about 6 millimeters thick. It is made of plastic and has a glass surface. Inside it, there is a set of microchips to perform the functions assigned to it. A seemingly innocent item, and yet the greatest threat to privacy the world has ever known. We call them cell phones and voluntarily carry them with us everywhere so anyone can spy on us. George Orwell seems like a boring prophet when you look at the current reality. 20 years ago, they were a novelty. Now we perceive these small toys as a necessity. The world changes even when we sleep. I know what you're thinking. There are rules and built-in protections. But just think about the device in my hand right now. It belongs to my wife, with whom I have lived for more than 19 years. She was never anything other than loving and supportive. She is a dominant spouse, but not obstinate. For my part, I believed in the sanctity of marriage. The obligations assumed must not be violated. I was sure that we would grow old together and that she would hold my hand on my deathbed. I made this deal many years ago. I traded my youth and freedom for the pleasure of her body next to me in bed. I traded my life for her love and devotion. This commitment with me is stronger than any steel bars. I'm not some romantic idiot. I'm far from that. Marriage is something I take seriously. It was not love that was on my side, but a rational decision. Doris, my wife, is a romantic, and perhaps this is the problem of an ancient incompatibility that is finally making itself known. Here I am with my wife's iPhone at 2 o'clock in the morning in the small downstairs office we usually share. I borrowed the phone from the table next to her bed in our marital area. This is the only time it was available. She never leaves it. She, like most modern women, never goes anywhere without her phone. She spends more time on it than on any other activity. It is within her reach 24 hours a day. It is in her purse or bag when not in her hands. It lies next to the bed when she sleeps. I had to wait until I was sure she was asleep to take it. Why take her phone, you ask? I ask myself. Have I gone crazy? How can I suspect my loving wife? What's wrong with me? I blame my profession for everything. She called me, which made me suspicious. I only see the dark side, the evil that people do, not the good. To put it bluntly, I am a lawyer. There, besides the grace of God, there is you. Therefore, I suspect her without good reason or basis. It was a small thing. I walked into the kitchen as my wife, Doris, actually Dolores, but no one uses her full Christian name, was talking on the phone. In all previous cases, she would continue to ignore my presence, but this time she immediately hung up and seemed to get nervous. Later that evening, I asked her for her phone number so I could call for the pizza I convinced her to have for dinner. We no longer have a home phone since the girls went away to university. It became part of a strategy to save money any way we could. She's usually against takeout because she's very conscious of her weight, but today she quickly gave in and gave up her phone easily. Why not? She cleared her phone log and text messages. No doubt, being a layman, she thought it was a good idea, but it wasn't. In fact, it screamed cheating. I suspect because clearing the log is an attempt to hide. So what is it hiding? That's what I need to find out. I'm fairly well informed and know that it's easier to tap a cell phone than a more traditional phone. If you don't believe me, go online and type in cell phone bug and see what comes up. I even bought a little book on Amazon for $4.99 that explains all the basics. The big problem with the iPhone is jailbreak hacking flashing. What is it? Well, it's having to change Apple's core operating code to allow you to install non-Apple software. My loving daughters broke the software lock on their mother's phone when she first received it. The girls were very proud of their ability to do this. Holding my wife's phone in one hand and the small cable that connects to the iPad in the other, I hesitate. Am I the right person now? Do I want to do this? Dare I do it? The reality is that this could end 19 years of marriage, a very good marriage. Why am I looking for a way out? We are a happy couple. There is nothing I could ask of her that she wouldn't do for me. On the other hand, she rarely asks for anything in return. I entered into our marriage reluctantly, but I never regretted it. I'm David P. Landon Jr. I was at a frat party. Now, forget everything you know about fraternities. The Brothers of Sigma Chi are a fraternity that doesn't fit the mold. They were the biggest fraternity on campus because all you needed to join was a good heart. That's right, the brothers did not respect money or position, it was all about brotherhood and doing the right thing. Jocks mixed with nerds, academic stars with guys constantly on probation. It was not uncommon to see a group drinking beer in the basement while upstairs there were long tutoring sessions for those brothers who needed help. All races and religions mixed together, we were brothers. To become one of us, it was enough to be a good person. It sounds simple, but it's not. When you fail to live up to the standard, you let everyone down. The feeling of guilt is the hardest thing, the realization that you have failed your brothers. Being a Sigma meant having all the responsibilities that came with being a good brother. The annual freshman reunion was one of those responsibilities. The older brothers were chaperones. We invited all freshmen boys and girls. The girls invited the boys so that we could look at potential brothers in advance. More women came than men because everyone knew you were safe in Sigma's house. We were all gentlemen. I was a second-year law student and usually well insulated from the campus parties, but now it was my turn, along with 9 other brothers, to watch the newcomers. It was a responsibility. If you're a Sigma, you don't shy away from responsibility. Doris came to the party with her girlfriends. I don't know what they were doing, but they were very happy when they came. Of course, I recognized her. She was the eldest daughter of my mother's best friend. When I entered university, I was not yet 18. Doris was thin and flat-chested. Since then, I have seen Doris several times, but my memories of her have been tainted by earlier memories. In my mind, she remained a child. This was no longer the case. She was a graceful young woman, although still very young, but definitely more of a woman than a girl. I had no choice but to come up and say hello. Doris was 6 years younger than me, as were the friends she was with. My intention was to say hello and leave things as they were. She was high. I hoped it was just marijuana or alcohol, and I didn't want to embarrass her. Doris greeted me enthusiastically and kissed me deeply on the lips. She was always friendly and pleasant to be around, but it was obvious that she liked to show me off as an older student whom she happened to know. The fact that I was a member of the fraternity and one of the official hosts was a bonus for her. I ended up looking after them all evening and driving them home after the party. Doris took advantage of the opportunity and made an appointment with me for the following week. We became friends and dated until the end of the semester. Nothing serious. She was a freshman, and I was a graduate student, so it wasn't a serious relationship, at least on my part. She broke off the relationship. She wanted to date other people. I didn't mind at the time, but I quickly became depressed. I felt like I was missing her. I didn't know why. She wasn't beautiful in the classical sense of the word. She had such a young, fresh, and innocent look. She was very pretty. There was nothing impressive about her appearance, but one look into her soft brown eyes, and I was hooked. It was not love on my part, but rather a deep attraction. Doris had a wonderful, bubbly personality. When she left a big hole. I'm smart, insightful, but introverted and a little shy, and I tend to withdraw into myself. Doris is outgoing, and if given the chance, she will make friends with everyone in the room. She's the first person everyone invites to a party and the last person everyone wants to see leave. But she broke up with me to date other guys. I accepted it. I was hurt. I was left with a bruised ego. But that's what breaking up with you does. And then came July after my second year of law school. I needed summer practice. A summer job during your sophomore year is practically a necessity if you want to graduate from school with job prospects. I was looking for work in New York, Chicago, Washington, and all the big cities, but everyone else was looking too. I eventually found a job in our sleepy little college town at an old law firm. The apartment I shared with 2 others was only rented until June. I needed to find accommodation for the summer. Luckily, the university had opened a dorm for summer school students, and they needed an assistant or responsible older student who could act as a surrogate parent. The rent was free in exchange for me coming as needed. This suited me, and it meant that the meager salary of a legal clerk could be put to better use. Doris went to summer school and lived in the dorm that I supervised. I did my best to avoid her until one day I walked up the stairs, and she was a whole flight ahead of me. When I reached my floor, Doris was coming down from the other side. Quite strange, I thought, but she came to block my way up. "I want to talk," she said. "About what?" I asked, trying to walk past her. "About us and what stupidity I did." As it turned out, she regretted the breakup and was completely remorseful. She asked for a second chance. I wasn't sure, but I saw no reason not to start dating and keep my emotions in reserve this time. Doris did not joke but pressed me. Her birthday is August 15th. She turned 18 that summer, and when I asked her what she wanted for her birthday, she said, "I want you to make love to me. I'm a virgin, and I want you to be my first." I was shocked. I wasn't ready to move on, and I told her so. She did not take no for an answer, and as has become the rule over the many years of our life together, what Doris wants is what she gets. The day after she turned 18 was a Saturday. Doris volunteered at a women's shelter run by the local Now chapter. Early Saturday morning, Doris went to help at the shelter. I had no idea what she was doing there, and the location of the shelter was kept secret. She didn't have a car, so I had to pick her up from the student union on campus around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a short walk from the hostel where we stayed for a few more days. The new fall semester was supposed to start in 10 days, but we still had a few days left in our current dorm rooms. The Union is a large coffee shop cafeteria in the center of campus. At 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, the place was not crowded, but it was never empty. When Doris showed up, she was wearing jeans and a Now t-shirt, but she had an overnight bag with her. Obviously, we were going to spend the night together, but why carry a bag when we lived in the same building, at least temporarily? When Doris and I met at the Union, she gave me a deep, passionate kiss. She announced to the world, or at least to the students on campus, that we were going to have a night. She was making a statement, but what was this statement, and why were we telling the world what we were doing? We walked into my dorm room like the president and his consultant. I didn't have roommates, it was just us. I lit the candles and took out a bottle of good White Star champagne. She was nervous as hell, and I was no better. I'm not Don Juan, I only had 2 girls, and I never spent more than 2 nights with any of them. Doris put a lot of pressure on me. We drank a little, then I slowly undressed her. I began to explore her body with my hands and then with my lips. When she was ready, I undressed her. When I took off my shorts and threw them to her, she giggled. Bottom line, Doris was super good. Intim with her changed my life. She loved it and couldn't get enough of it, and she wasn't afraid to show her enthusiasm. With Doris, I learned to relax and enjoy night. It was a completely new experience for me. What I had before wasn't even a pale imitation. But bed with Doris wasn't hard or intense. Doris made intim for fun. Night was frequent, but she made sure I always wanted it. A serious part of the relationship between us was that we were together as a couple. I should have taken note of this, but now I was hopelessly in love with this young woman. Doris knew this and soon used night with me to get what she wanted, a guy she could wear like a new winter coat. We went everywhere together, and Doris left no one in any doubt that we were a couple. I had never been part of a real couple before and found that I enjoyed it. I guess I was what they call a one-woman man. Doris decided it was time to share our relationship with her family, which consisted of Margaret and Lawrence Boswell, her parents, her younger sister Marianne, and her younger brother Larry Jr. It was a quite prosperous family. Larry Sr. was a senior vice president at Shant National Bank, and Margaret taught at Shant Community College. They were an attractive and impressive family. They treated me like royalty. They were impressed by my status as a third-year law student. Moreover, her mother, Margaret, was from Shant. She went to high school with my mother at Sacred Heart Academy for Girls. She became a teacher, and my mother became a nurse. Margaret Boswell was an extremely attractive woman. She is taller than Doris and not so voluptuously built, but she has a patrician grace. She had that stately beauty that ages well. Her husband was a tall, silver-haired businessman who looked great in a suit but was showing slight signs of middle age. He looked older than his 45 years, unlike his wife, who at 40 looked 35. The youngest daughter, Mary Ann, was just beginning to round out at 16, but seemed to resemble her mother in height and appearance. Little Larry was only 11, but he was tall and showed promise that in time he would have a strong physique. He and I became great friends, and now he is my best friend. My folks fell in love with Doris long before we started dating, so she quickly became a dear member of my family. Even my little sister, Paula, was a supporter of Doris. My brother was too young to have an opinion. My family was not as wealthy as Doris's family. My father, David Sr., ran the family equipment rental business with my Uncle John. My uncle is my older brother by 10 years and is a bit slow-witted. Under his strict leadership, the business did well, but it was my father's outgoing nature and his ability to make friends and work with anyone, including people he hated, that truly built the business. My mother needed to work because the business made modest money, and my uncle is very conservative about profits. I am very close to my mother, Agnes, a tall, pretty woman who, at 41, was 8 years younger than my father. She, like me, towers over my father. A mother's most striking attribute is her blonde hair, and these days it's not just the hairdresser who helps. She is a registered nurse who regularly worked night shifts. When I was a child, her work schedule was 4 shifts a week. It wasn't the same shifts every week, they alternated. That's how it was while I was growing up. But over the years, she got her master's degree in nursing and is now the head nurse at the hospital where she works. She always needed to work and brought in as much or more income than my father. My relationship with my father is more complex than with my mother. My father was always trying to get me and my shy, introverted personality to open up. He is a friendly, outgoing guy who seems to know everyone and believes in getting along with everyone. Dad believes in turning the other cheek and will never start a fight if it can be avoided. Most of the time, he and I see things differently, but he certainly approves of Doris very much. This is the girl for you, son. She is smart and beautiful like her mother. As a child, my favorite thing to do was wait for my mother. If she worked from 4 o'clock to midnight, Dad let me stay up on Fridays and Saturdays, and then I babysat my brothers and sisters while he went to pick up Mom from work. They brought home hamburgers and shakes, and I enjoyed them with my parents. Sometimes, my mother would come home very late alone, and she would kiss me goodnight as I lay in bed before she went to shower and get into her bed. When she leaned towards me, I caught the scent of her perfume, Chanel No. 5, which she put on when she got dressed. Sometimes, I would wake up to the sound of the shower running, followed by whispers between my parents and my mother's signature laugh, followed by their bed starting to squeak. It was a loving home. Even when business was slow, money became scarce, and Mom took on more hours. My mother and Doris's mother were practically inseparable friends. Families were generally well mixed and looked forward to the joining of houses. Mom summed up the family's feelings toward Doris. This is a wonderful girl, Davy, don't ruin it. We are all looking forward to the wedding. Mom, with all her love for me as her eldest child, sometimes considered me to be forever 12 years old. For my part, I think I can be quite stubborn and immature at times. When it came to Doris, perhaps some of that came through. I liked the whole story with the girl, but it was on this level, free and easy, that I wanted to leave it. Doris had other ideas about this. She moved in with me in September. I tried to finish my 3rd and final year of law school without much trouble, but she insisted that we move in together. This strained our finances, as I tried not to be too much of a burden to my parents. Doris simply dropped a few hints to her mother, who increased her allowance, but this seemed to give reason to expect that our relationship would become serious. By the beginning of May, everything had gone beyond expectations and turned into "what are you waiting for?" Doris made it clear that I had taken her virginity and that I was in her debt. It's strange because it was her idea to make such a demand, but I could understand it from her point of view. I had to graduate from law school. I would be 25, single, and the proud owner of a ticket to a professional career. I was a very desirable catch for many single women living in the real world outside of the university. On the other hand, she was just finishing her sophomore year, having accumulated enough credits to skip a semester but still had more than a year left before graduating. Moreover, she was an English literature major and needed a master's degree to teach in a high school. From her point of view, I was leaving her behind with all that she had done for me. This whole situation should have been a warning of sorts. Doris looked at things from the perspective of what's good for Doris is good for us. The worst thing is that she was right. No matter how selfish it may seem, we had a good time together. What she wanted was almost always better than my goals. With her, I was in some strange, incomprehensible way, complete as a person. So, if she wanted a ring on her finger before I went out into the wide world, why did I hesitate? I didn't like Doris, so I said it. I was sure that I loved her, and I was comfortable in our relationship. She brightened up my days and left me in a perpetual vacillation between lust for her body and complete intimate satisfaction. Having Doris in my bed meant having no room for any other woman. I know that men will tell you that they can't see a beautiful girl without wondering what she's like in bed. With Doris, I couldn't even fantasize about another woman. My mind went from the sight of another woman to the image of Doris, the sight of whom made me struggle with an erection, but to marry her and be bound by responsibility for another for the rest of your life. I tried every excuse possible to leave Doris and avoid marriage. My main excuse was that she was too young, only 18 years old, while I turned 25 in June. It was an excellent reason, although not entirely real. But my mother, like no one else, rejected it. Doris is very mature for her age, while you are the complete opposite. Besides, I was a medical student and was only 17 when I married your father. It's not a matter of age but of maturity. She has it, and your hesitation after living together as virtual husband and wife shows that you still don't have it. Mom wanted me to become a man, but I hesitated and prophesied. In retrospect, I don't know. She's 18, what will happen when she wakes up one day and decides that she missed out on her youth by getting married too early? I said. It looks like what we're talking about is that you missed it. You will get a professional degree and ride off into the sunset, leaving the poor girl behind, my mother said, seeing right through me. In the end, Doris had too much influence over me and too many allies for me to hold out, so I swallowed my doubts and tied the knot. A week after the bar exam, there was no bachelor party, although I heard there was a wild bachelorette party. I didn't have enough friends for the party, nor the time needed. I studied 20 hours a day to pass the New York bar exam, the toughest in the country. Only 41% of Harvard graduates passed the exam, and with the exception of Brooklyn and Albany, which are no more than 3-year bar courses, the average pass rate is 40%. By the time I found out I had passed the exam, Doris was 3 months pregnant. Theoretically, the pregnancy was an accident, but if you believe that, then you are clearly not very smart. Doris strengthened her position. We knew they were twins 3 days before the exam results came out. I sweated over these results. By that time, I already had a position as an attorney at the firm where I worked the summer Doris and I dated, but it would only come to me if I passed the exam. This meant a significant increase in salary, but money was still tight. I had to work 60 hours a week and bust my 5th place to make sure we had diapers when the kids came. Doris never let our precarious financial situation or pregnancy affect her. She took her final junior year exam just an hour before her water broke. 5 hours later, without a single groan, she gave birth to 2 girls, weighing 2.8 kilos each. They were beautiful, perfect, and absolutely identical. For me, it was love at first sight. 18 years later, I still love those girls, but not as much as before. At first, Doris and I had a hard time. There was little money, and we lived in a small apartment. She never complained or made me feel guilty for not being able to provide for her better. Being a father was very difficult. On the one hand, it was scary, but on the other, your chest hurts from the love you feel. I will never forget the joy of reading to the girls before bed, Make Way for the Ducklings, The Cat in the Hat, Charlotte's Web, then Little House in the Big Woods and Inn of Green Gables, and finally, The Papers of Washington Irving and Tales of the Alhambra. My 2 loves, who seemed to adore me and believed that I could do anything, solve every problem, fix every broken doll, and make the sunshine on every rainy day. It was a very hard life for me, but it brought great rewards in the form of hugs and kisses. Not everything was so rosy and flowery, there were dark days too. Doris and I went through all the crises together. I fell apart when the kids got pneumonia and were hospitalized. Only Doris remained strong and told me that God would not take our girls from us. David, look at me. They will feel better. Believe in this, and know that no matter what happens, I will always love and support you. In those early years, Doris was the rock on which our marriage was built. She was the pillar that supported me. I couldn't have done it without her. She was eternally grateful to me, and I wanted to provide for her and our girls. I needed to succeed for them more than for myself. I am a rather lazy and unambitious person. Marriage to Doris, her love, and our children changed all that. I was determined to achieve success for my family, and to achieve this goal, I made some compromises. Those first years were difficult, my work required constant effort, but the reward was meager. I had to compromise my principles and use my wits to rise above the pack of legal wolves that were all chasing the same prey. At home, Doris and little Patricia and Elizabeth, Pat and Beth, made every sacrifice worthwhile. Doris finished school in the evenings, leaving me at home to do office work and look after the children. I couldn't be happier. She eventually got her doctorate. When they started kindergarten, Doris Boswell, Ph.D., began teaching at a community college, but after 3 years, became a full professor of Shakespeare studies at the university. Her income was God-sent, but by then, it was too late for me. I had already become a partner through less than honorable means. My income was as high as my morals were low. I had a family to take care of, and I was a lawyer, which meant I could rationalize the sale of my soul. Most Americans have an unwavering belief in the sanctity of private property. They view home ownership as a goal and a right. The idea that the government could come in and arbitrarily take away their home is unthinkable, and that's where foreclosure comes into play. When the government needs property for a public purpose, such as building a highway, bridge, school, or hospital, it goes through a process commonly called confiscation. It is simply the government taking property it needs for a public purpose and paying the owner the value of the property taken. Simply put, in theory, it is unfortunate but necessary. We lawyers call this process eminent domain, from the Latin supreme lordship, a fancy way of saying that the government has the right to take your land. In theory, they should pay you what it's worth, but if you're stupid enough to trust the government to treat you fairly, then you deserve to have it taken away. This is where lawyers come to the rescue. Eminent domain is a complex system with a set of predefined steps. A good, experienced lawyer is able to play these steps in such a way as to get the maximum amount of money. No one has ever regretted hiring a good lawyer to represent them in a foreclosure proceeding. The trouble is that most people do not get representation or get an inexperienced lawyer. So, the key to success as a foreclosure lawyer is to get your name and your offer, namely a lot more money, in front of potential clients. I owe my success to my lucky last name because when I was accepted into law school, Landon was right in front of Landrew for 3 years alphabetically. I sat next to James Landrew, a young Republican, a member of the State Republican Committee, and after graduation, a legal intern in the New York State Senate. He eventually became a paralegal and then counsel for the Legislative Committee on Corporations and Associations. This was a big breakthrough for me. Jimmy and I were close, so who would he come to if he was in trouble if not a friend? It was the same Committee on Corporations, which is important because it considers all issues related to eminent domain. Why might this be useful? The answer is simple, because no matter how the process of entering into an inheritance begins now, it is an excellent way for the powerful to rob the weak. The taking of property for actual public use currently constitutes only a small part of the taking of property by the state. In most cases, the state acts on behalf of some private interest. Different terms are used, but most often, it is called some form of redevelopment. Don't believe me? Then next time you're in New York, take a look at the New York Times headquarters. It's a beautiful, majestic skyscraper next to Times Square. The land on which it stands was seized by eminent domain, some of the most valuable in the world, in a bargain that is said to have saved the Times nearly $80 million. Needless to say, the newspaper did not point this out to its readers. My job is to seek justice as best I can. I will use all kinds of tricks, third-party appraisers who will say whatever I ask and government appraisers who sometimes work for me. I pay my appraisers well, thereby ensuring that my clients receive extremely fair treatment. The strategy is to get to the one who's about to get ripped off before anyone else, and that's where my friend Jimmy comes in. It started innocently enough with a vague warning to be on the lookout for a major property grab along the Hudson that was clearing the way for a luxury development. But it soon turned into a cash-for-money game. Jimmy has problems with horses as well as slot machines and Indian casinos. He often needs money, not gifts, just loans that are never returned. Partners in my firm were amazed at my ability to spot new potential business. My keen perception was well rewarded, and for many years, things remained that way. Nothing illegal, just a little background knowledge and a little work on my part to knock down doors on people who would be much better off if I were their lawyer. It was actually a community service, but once you step over the line, it's easy to jump over it. I downloaded Doris's phone, my vicious program. It was designed to create an audio file of every phone conversation my wife had and transfer it to my iPad. She sent every text message she sent or received to my phone, but it also gave me the opportunity to listen in on her conversations. I could do this in real time or set the bug that was her phone to record for up to 2 hours and send the same to my iPad. In theory, there was nothing Doris could say or hear that she couldn't share with me. The practice turned out to be somewhat different. On the first day, my wife spent almost 5 hours on the phone. It would be overwhelming just to look through her phone conversations. She spent 45 minutes with a friend doing nothing but talking about a dress she saw at the mall but didn't buy. For 3 weeks, I worked my way through this nonsense, and it seemed to me that I had become quite good at this matter. I became convinced that I was suffering from paranoia. I was ready to call it a day when the damn messages arrived. I was in a meeting with a new client when my phone made a distinctive ringing sound indicating that I had a new message. I ignored it, but after a few minutes, there was another ringing, and then a third. I rarely send or receive messages, and Doris was the same, a matter of age, I would say. Lyrics are not part of the DNA of my generation. When I finished the conference with the client, I checked my phone. 3 new messages had been sent by spyware to Doris's phone. Remember, we have 2 days, Mark. I miss you so much. When and where will you be? Doris Cooper at 12:30. Love you. It took me a while to realize that Doris had a lunch date with a man named Mark, whom she missed and who said he loved her. The restaurant was a simple Cooper's, a small, very intimate place just north of the Ring Road and therefore quite off the road, exactly the kind of place you'd choose for a private date. It was already after 12, and I had no way of getting there that quickly, but I had an ace up my sleeve that I could overhear. I bugged her phone, used my iPad to listen in, and casually got into the car. At first, I could only hear the noise of cars. Doris was in her car as she arrived. I heard the faint sounds of the restaurant and the greeting of the owner. "Good afternoon, can I help you?" said a pleasant female voice. "I'm meeting someone." "Oh, here he is." Then there was the sound of them hugging and then possibly kissing. Doris sat, and they exchanged greetings. They talked a little about work. Apparently, they worked together at the university. He sounded young, strong, and very confident. He soon turned the conversation to her, compliments poured in on her hair, her dress, and her overall stunning beauty and youthfulness. I listened to the seduction. It would be interesting if it weren't my wife. When the food arrived, the conversation turned to me, how old and fat I was, how gray and boring I was, a cold fish who doesn't deserve a beautiful, energetic young woman, and finally, his needs, how much he wants her and how happy they could be. But I can't, I'm married. I intend to grow old with David, please understand. Don't you see that he is already old? You're still young, live while you can. If you can't leave him, then we'll play it safe. No, I won't lie. I've never been with anyone other than my David. I love my husband, but I want you and need you to be complete. I need David to see this, there must be a way, just give me time. For everyone's sake, please. I've been waiting for so long. I know, but I need time. Okay, but please not for very long. The topic returned to the mundane. When I arrived at Cooper's parking lot, I took a spot far back in the parking lot, out of sight of what I recognized as my wife's car, but with a view of the door. At some point, they returned to the conversation about how they needed to be together and that Doris would try to find a way that would not risk her marriage because, in the end, I still love Dave. We've been together for so long. It's my responsibility to try to hold it all together. That's why I love you so much. You have such deep feelings. I just have to show you that pity is not love, he said that bloated. As they were leaving, they came into my field of vision. Doris, I noticed, was dressed to kill, and I would swear she didn't leave the house dressed like that morning. He was tall, slender, and athletic. He had black skin, not very dark, more like dark coffee, but black. Was he handsome? I guess it was a matter of preference, but he was young, maybe no more than 30. When they parted, they kissed. He wrapped his arms around her and pressed himself against her until she finally pulled away. I wasn't as jealous as I might have imagined. I wanted to kill him, of course, beat him half to death, but for this, I would need some means, let's say a baseball bat and a little surprise. It's not fair, but then there's nothing fair about seducing someone else's wife. I was not deceived. He just wanted to get into her pants, nothing more. All this love nonsense was just that. He was a smooth manipulator. He used her until he got tired of her and moved on. Somehow, I suspected that this would not be a surprise to Doris. She is a smart woman. My wife was playing a dangerous game, not with her lover, but with me. Could she believe that I would tolerate this? Our marriage with Doris can be called typically American. Maybe 5% of American men are masters of their domains. They rule over their houses. The remaining 95% are forced to be content with what they have. In my case, I got a lot straightened out. I've never won an argument with Doris, even when I thought I had won the round and she looked remorseful and apologetic. The reality was that in the end, she got her way. She knew this from the beginning, of course, but I had to learn it in the bedroom. Like most men, I got what my wife wanted to give me. Night was on her terms. These conditions were what one would expect from a good wife and mother. Doris loved Intim, but that didn't stop her from setting limits. Over the years, we did it the way Doris wanted, which was the right way. However, this is an unfair point of view. I never lacked night. I couldn't say I wanted it and didn't get it. It was a bit of a relief when she started to slow down. Doris knows how to perceive her desires as our needs. She achieves her goal through repression. She wears you down. However, she is a great wife and the best mother. Throughout our marriage, she was either studying or working full-time, but she cooked, cleaned, and kept house. I participated, but Doris was the lioness. She controlled everything, and if she manipulated me, it was only because, in her opinion, it was necessary. I resented her emanations only on those rare occasions when I noticed how much she enjoyed controlling me. Any honest and insightful married man will admit that his wife likes to manipulate him. It must be an elemental part of being a woman. But Mark was completely different. I understood his appeal. It was new, different, and forbidden. He was irresistible to a woman like Doris. To him, she could play the role of the bad girl. It gave me the freedom to move beyond a life that had become predictable and less fulfilling. He offered an alternative to an empty nest and an old, tired husband. The fact that he was black cannot be ignored. Novelty, indifference, enhanced Intim. It won't last long, but it wasn't meant to be. Mark was only the first man outside of our marriage, but not the last. I became very depressed because I could clearly see that if Doris wanted to cuckold me, then so be it. There were few alternatives on my side: stay with Doris or leave her. The last one was difficult. We went through it all together. I was, and I hated to admit it, very dependent on Doris. After so many years of being together, I couldn't imagine life without her. When I returned home that evening, I tried my best to be, if not cheerful, at least neutral. Doris knew my moods and saw through my feigned calm. "What happened, Dave?" she asked. "Nothing. I'm probably tired from work," I answered. "You're working too much. You should slow down and take better care of yourself. Maybe join the gym," she said. After that, I looked at her closely and very critically. "You see, I joined the gym last year." I know I left long before she woke up every morning, but how could she not notice the results? I had lost 13 of the 18 pounds I had gained since we got married, and I had a lot of muscle because I worked out with a personal trainer 3 days a week. Her new boyfriend wasn't because I was out of shape or boring, it was all about her perception of me. I have an old, comfortable pair of slippers. The new, nicely ones are what she wants to try on, but mostly she will wear the old ones, even though she no longer appreciates them. I didn't take her indecisiveness to heart because Doris needed to work on herself. In the end, she bought the dress she had been eyeing and talking about. She was a woman who took a long time to make a decision. She was still debating with herself whether she should try on her new man the next day. Another surprise awaited me. The phone bug detected a conversation that I almost missed. In fact, I only listened because I was curious to see if my wife would even hint anything to her mother. "Hi, Mom, I wanted to check with you about Thanksgiving. Will you bring some bourbon-baked sweet potatoes and broccoli salad?" "Of course, dear, but tell me, how was lunch with Mark?" "Oh, Mom, he's just great, but he wants to go further, and I can't." "Why not?" "I have no idea why you didn't correct your husband years ago. Now you've lost your edge. The children have grown up, you can't use them as leverage." "Mom, I would never do that. I may be a bad wife, but I can't be a bad mother." "Nonsense, you are a great wife." "Did David ever complain?" "I will answer that, no. You keep a perfect home, cook great, raise 2 wonderful young women, and keep your man satisfied in the bedroom. I won't even mention the fact that you contribute more financially to the household than your husband." "Yes, but now I'm thinking about infidelity." "No, that's not true. This is cheating only if the man does not give consent. David needs to be made aware that women are physically different from men. Our libido increases with age, but theirs decreases. We need and crave variety in the bedroom, while they only want intim. We can satisfy many men while our men are limited by their stamina. The fact that you have another man will not affect Dave in any way. He's a great person, and he can prove it by giving you some space. Make sure he knows that he will come first and will be treated very well. I don't know, David is a little boy in some ways. Do you really think he will share? And if he doesn't share, what will he do then? I don't want to risk losing him. Look, your dad isn't exactly a big thinker, but I've been dating other men for almost 3 decades. He didn't leave me, and he doesn't complain. It took him a while to adjust, but once he did, we were more than fine. You should know this." "Yes, but David is not Dad. I don't see him accepting that I will have an additional lover." "Okay, let me talk to Agnes. After all, she dealt with his father, and she knows her son like no one else. Remember, she forced him to marry you at the very beginning. Let's see what she thinks," my mother-in-law said, and then with a few more incoherent words, she ended the conversation that had unsettled me. What did she mean by my mother and father? I had a terrible feeling that I knew. In fact, I always suspected, but I didn't allow myself to believe it. Listening to Doris's phone was a mistake. The audition made me feel inadequate. It was about finding out what people thought of you, and it wasn't much. I spent the next few days waiting for developments to happen, but there were none. And then, she got a call from my daughter, Beth. "Hey, Mom, Pat and I will be home late Tuesday night on vacation, but we need to be back on Saturday. We have hot dates with 2 guys from the football team for the Sunday after their game." "Oh, okay, I'll let your dad know." "But I thought Pat was dating that guy Rick who swims well." "She's dating, but he has to make do with what she gives him," Beth said, giggling. "I think times have changed if guys are willing to let their girlfriends date others." "Oh, Mom, you are so ancient. But tell me, how are things going with Mark?" "No way. I'm married to your dad. What should I do with Mark?" "Oh, please, Mom, don't be like yesterday. Dad is a fat old man. He can't expect you to turn down a little night with a handsome guy like Mark because of some updated tradition. You have to go for it. Dad will understand. He loves you, and he really has no choice." "Who would want an old man like him?" Beth said. In the background, I heard Patty add, "Right now." Then, apparently, Patty grabbed the phone. "Mom, do you want us to talk to Dad? We can explain this to him and remind him of everything you have done for him. I know that he loves you, and who could not love you? And you were younger, he cannot count on you to be a one-woman man. It's not fair to you. I don't know, your father never contradicted me, and God knows when he was younger, he had such an opportunity. He may not see it our way. Men have egos, and your father can be very sensitive. But, Mom, we know Daddy loves you, and I don't see him denying you anything if you explain how much you want and need a relationship with Mark. Just make sure he understands that you will always put him first. That's what I told Rick, and he doesn't mind, Pat said. Well, girls, your grandmother said that she would talk to Grandma Langdon. I'm sure everything will work out between the two of them. I just hope that your father can understand that Mark is not a danger to him and that what Mark and I have is only a shadow of what your dad and I have, Doris replied. To say that I was shocked and hurt to hear my daughters talk about me does not convey the depth of the pain I felt. Perhaps I should have taken comfort in the fact that my wife and daughter still insisted that Doris still loved the fat old man, but I didn't. I was shocked, and several days passed before I was able to recover my senses enough to appreciate my situation. I allowed myself to imagine how I should look to others. Yes, I played sports and was in good physical shape, but I did nothing about the gray in my hair or the unfashionable clothes I wore. A lawyer is supposed to look conservative, but I allowed myself to look ancient. My first step was to go to one of the new salons that had opened. Some of my gray hair was removed, and my hair was styled. They say it's the men who don't notice, but Doris didn't even comment. My next step was to go to New York to buy clothes. I almost completely changed my wardrobe and tried to show off my new slim body. No, I didn't look 30 again, but I didn't look any older than my 45 years either. Neither Doris nor my daughters noticed. When the girls came home for Thanksgiving, I expected comments, but I received the same regular kisses on the cheek that I realized I had been receiving for years. My family took me for granted, expecting me to just be there when needed and not interfere when not. They had other concerns that were not related to me. In truth, I had few common interests with my wife or daughters. We were strangers living in the same house. Now I knew more about them than they could know about me. I have always been closed and never open. Accordingly, they had an erroneous opinion about me. Thanksgiving is here, and so are families. The Boswells and Landons arrived. The guests included various grandparents, grandchildren, siblings, and their respective spouses, for a total of 21 people gathered around our properly set dinner table. They came early to watch the parade from New York on TV and then the football game. The women mostly gathered in the kitchen, and the men in the living room. I left a quick peek into the family room, where my daughter-in-law Marianne and Larry Jr.'s wife and were looking after the small children, along with my daughter Beth. I went to the office and locked myself in there. Having inserted the headphones, I made myself comfortable and began to listen to the conversation in the kitchen through my wife's phone. He went into the office and closed the door. I recognized the voice of my daughter Patty. Okay, now, will someone tell me what's wrong with my son? I heard my mother's voice. What do you mean, Mom? My wife answered. Well, he has new clothes, a new haircut, and if I'm not mistaken, a little less gray hair. To tell you the truth, I noticed something, but I couldn't figure out what it was, Doris said. If I'm not mistaken, he's also lost weight compared to last year, said my sister Paula. She, her husband, and daughter lived in California and had not seen me since last Christmas. Yes, it could be, said Mom. I don't know, he had been very depressed the last 2 weeks, and I thought he was having problems at work again, Doris said. You don't think he knows about Mark, is it true? Suggested my mother-in-law. I cannot understand, but from where? And there is nothing for him to know about. I didn't do anything with Mark, said my loving wife. Perhaps he is having a midlife crisis. He is at this age, and the girls have left home. Perhaps it is so, my mother said. Yes, that explains the hair, the weight loss, and the clothes, Mother Boswell suggested. Then we need to proceed carefully. He needs to be gradually brought back to his senses if he is having a midlife crisis, my mother said. Maybe I should put Mark aside for later, Doris suggested. Nonsense. Davy needs a good but gentle kick in the 5th place. We must bring him out of this state, and in the process, force him to execute the program. It won't help if you're depressed too, my mom suggested. So, you think that Mom should tell him that she wants to take a lover, right, Grandma? Asked Patty. Well, not so directly, dear. I think we'd better ask the men to soften him up. Let him talk to Dad and Larry. They can reassure him and share their experiences. They are both happy and have adjusted well to the situation. There's no reason why your father can't be the same. But if he suddenly felt that he was getting old and life was passing him by, then it was not time to immediately tell him that his wife had taken a young lover. First, you need to accustom him to this idea, said his mother. To be a cuckold, Patty giggled. Of course not. Your father is a proud man, a good husband and father. He must be led carefully, and his needs carefully provided for. I have never left my husband without help. I have never had intim with another without caring about my husband. He might have been on the sidelines, but in my heart, he was always in first place. Dave Sr. knows he is the love of my life. It's up to us, and I mean all of us, to make my son feel loved. Doris, you're first in line, but we've got your back, right? Mom asked with general agreement. In this spirit, the women continued to dissect me and plan how I should be raised. And how and when Larry and my dad had to introduce me to the facts of family life with a hot wife, they didn't use that term. In their opinion, they satisfied Doris's natural instincts and legitimate needs. This way, the marriage would be strong and both parties would be satisfied. After all, Doris married young and made many sacrifices. Now that there were no children, she could relax while providing for her husband. My mother was the main driving force and obviously had the most experience. They talked about me as if I were a child who they were trying to force to behave well and correctly. I listened until I couldn't take it anymore, and then I pulled myself together and left the house. I walked until I decided it was time to go to the Thanksgiving holiday. When I returned to the house, Doris was worried. No one noticed me leaving, and my return gave them pause. Late in the evening, when we were alone in the house except the girls, Doris asked what was bothering me. I don't know, except that I feel like everything has to change, and maybe I don't want to go into the unknown. Baby, know that no matter what, I will always love you and that you have always been and will always be the most important person in the world to me, she said, cuddling up to me in bed. I didn't answer, and what could I say to that? Her words made me feel guilty. She always made me feel guilty. On the first Saturday in December, I found myself at Giant Stadium with my father and father-in-law. Larry bought tickets and very good seats. My old man paid for the round-trip limousine and liquor for the trip. Larry bought beer and snacks at the stadium. Both men were very well prepared. After an awkward start where they tried to get to the topic of how great it was to be a cuckold, they hit all of my mother's main points. The main arguments boiled down to the fact that women of a certain age needed a young lover and the opportunity to explore their pretty. If you love your wife, you give her the opportunity to explore herself and benefit greatly from it. I remained silent, not saying a word, until that enviable extended time warp that is the last 2 minutes of every professional football game. I remembered again how much I loved playing football in my youth and how and why I hated watching it. Of course, I don't know everything, but I do know that if I ever catch Doris with another man, it will be the end of the marriage without any ifs and buts. I said this so that these would be my last words on this topic. My seniors spent the last 2 minutes of the game, which lasted about 20 minutes, unsuccessfully trying to talk me out of my position. I simply repeated that any infidelity to Doris would result in me leaving. Who needs her for a wife? Because that's the kind of woman she'll be, I said. Both elders called me immature and bigoted before heading to the men's room. They were gone for a long time, and the stadium was mostly empty before they returned to me, and we headed home in a silent limousine. Later in the evening, I discovered that this was not just a line for the men's room they called home. Both my mother and mother-in-law called Doris before we returned home to discuss the situation further. Steps needed to be taken. Less than a week later, Larry and Dad dragged me back to a gentleman's club where there were only without clothes dancers and barmaids. Larry and Dad alternated between offering me overpriced drinks and lap dances. I limited myself to soft drinks, and my lap was free of extraneous pleasures. Words of wisdom from my hedonistically inclined elders were about the benefits of a mature and open marriage. I can't imagine myself trading my wife's loyalty for a lap dance, I said before leaving. I caught a taxi and went about my business. Afterwards, nothing was said about my abandonment of these two old fools. As we got closer to Christmas, I heard the conversations became more intense. Mark courted my wife and got me a date during the school holidays. It was perfect for lovers. They were free all day, and I, theoretically, worked. In fact, if anyone had looked closely at me, they would have suspected that something was wrong. Perhaps it's time for confession. You see, I'm what some people call shady or quirky. For many years, I carefully crossed the line until succumbing to temptation. I left the line far behind. It started with keyhole lots, which are areas that only have a small portion of the road. It can be difficult to build on such a site because access to the main plot of land is limited. We created this situation in this part of the country because of our archaic zoning laws. Rural land may be sold in 5 parcels with no subdivision requirements. Many farmers are starting to sell off 5-acre plots along the roads to raise money. When the main farm is put up for sale, only a small portion of the road may remain this way. You get large areas with so-called keyhole access. Just off the New York State Thruway, there were 10 keyhole lots, all landscaped with mobile homes or manufactured homes with 2 bedrooms. They were in the middle of nowhere, 20 miles on poor county roads from the Thruway interchange. It was highly undesirable and therefore inexpensive real estate. A large national retailer came in and needed a warehouse with good access to the interstate system. All he needed was 10 keyhole lots and a new Thruway entrance. No problem, and my buddy Jimmy was there with the information long before it leaked out. When I was knocking on doors to promote my services, I saw this. There was a small for sale sign hanging on a ramshackle fence post. It turned out to be 250-odd acres of poor quality pasture, remains of an old dairy farm well outside the redevelopment area but located on the old ring road. This road will soon need to be replaced with a good state road that will lead directly to the Thruway. This was land that was worth, at best, $1,500 an acre and would soon become 20 times that price. You had to be a saint to stand, and I was not a saint. Buying the land drained my 401k and any savings I had. I was left without money. My business became a money funnel for paying taxes and developing the land. I invested it in a Wyoming corporation, Stuyvesant Lattit, which a shady guy sold to me for $7,000. He created it 5 years ago for people like me who needed to hide what they were doing. Wyoming required non-disclosure of officers, directors, and shareholders. There was nothing connecting me to Stuyvesant. All I had to do was explain to Doris that my business was struggling and I was barely contributing to household expenses. I couldn't tell her why my finances were in trouble, so I lied. I blamed the economy and tough competition. Any other wife would have been angry or at least let me know what a loser I was. Doris kissed me and said, "We'll be fine, Davy, as long as we're all healthy and together." What's the difference? Doris worked extracurriculars and cut everything except what the girls needed. She did without everything. I don't think she bought herself a single new item of clothing in the year and a half that I struggled. I promised that I would compensate her for everything when the time comes, but for some reason, this never happened. 2 years after the purchase, I sold the last acre. The average price I received was $22,000 per acre. After that, I was already buying in front of the state, a little further from where they were buying. Questions have arisen, insiders accustomed to doing what I did were suspicious, an investigation was required. But the big shots didn't want to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. I was small and didn't bother them. I didn't touch the money. I told myself that this was for our old age, mine and Doris's. By then, people will have forgotten everything, and I will be able to come up with some plausible explanation for my family as to how my dirty money was honestly earned. The last thing I wanted was for Doris and our families to find out what kind of person I really was. At all costs, I had to protect my secret. I never thought that I would be sharing dirty secrets with my family. We spent Christmas Eve with relatives, as has already become a custom, but Christmas Day was a big holiday in my family's house. We arrived early because Mom and Doris had agreed among themselves, as usual. Doris prepared a huge roast turkey with stuffing, Mom Boswell was making her signature roast lamb, and my mom was putting a ham in the oven. It was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon when I lifted the stuffed turkey in a heavy iron frying pan out of the trunk of Doris's new Mercedes. The car, which came with a large down payment, was a birthday present from her parents. "David, when you finish with the turkey, I'd like to talk to you in the office," my mother said. It wasn't a request, but there was no hostility in her tone. To say the least, it sounded sympathetic. The study was in a small room at the front of the house, somewhat isolated. When I entered, my mother was sitting on a sofa or chair. There were several other chairs in the room, but she indicated that I should sit next to her. I sat down next to her as she turned to me, our knees almost touching. She took both my hands in hers, and I felt the cool comfort of those hands so familiar to me in my youth. "David, what's going on? You don't look like yourself. If you have problems, I and all the other members of this family are ready to help you," she said, leaning towards me, looking me straight in the eyes, expecting an answer, perhaps a request for help or guidance. A mother talks to her troubled son, hoping to give him the comfort he needs. What could be wrong? You have a loving and supportive family, a faithful wife, and 2 devoted daughters. I let the words I used give emphasis. My mother is not stupid. She heard what was not said. David, an honest man, supports his wife in what she needs. Part of being a good husband is making sacrifices. Just as your good wife has made so many sacrifices for you over the last 20 years, my mother was a very smart woman. She immediately realized that I was not such an ignorant fool as they took me for and came up with her own response. It was a smart appeal to the kindness and fairness she instilled in me as a child, the values we learn from our parents and cultivate through our personal behavior. From her perspective, I realized it was about a man's commitment to his marriage and family. It was a strange case when she completely misjudged her son, and for this mistake, I was entirely to blame. I misled everyone for so long that they no longer knew me. This was not the good, reliable person they took me for. I wore the costume of a hapless husband and father, a man who could be taken advantage of because of his own kind and loving nature. Her approach could never work on the person I am, but she could not know that the sleeper has awakened in a new world where technology had revealed all the secrets and human corruption prevailed. The fact is that I don't think that having a wife is honorable. Of course, all things are for sale. We sell ourselves for what we want, and this is not always money. In fact, it is rarely money, even when it changes hands. However, not all deals are dishonest, some we conclude before God. We make a promise and ask for blessings. True, we do not always keep our word, but we must make an effort. Otherwise, the woman may end up kissing her son goodnight with lips still warm from her infidelity. At the last phrase, my mother jumped back as if I had slapped her in the face. Until this moment, she was ready to continue the argument. I saw emotions play in her eyes, surprise, shame, anger, and finally pain. "David, what did you say?" "I said that your kisses when you returned home after adultery were an abomination." She released my hands and ran out of the room. I didn't need the phone to hear Doris's words of anguish as my mother ran out of the room. "Mom, what happened?" Doris cried. She must have been waiting for my mother's nod to ambush me. Apparently, this was a planned intervention. Perhaps everyone in the family was planning to hit me during the day. When I left the room, there was no one nearby. My mother apparently ran into the kitchen, taking with her another free family member. I decided that a strategic retreat was in order for me and walked out the front door as quietly as I could. I still had the keys to Doris's Mercedes, so I drove to the state park to Hendrick Hudson Lookout, the lover's walk of my youth. It took me until the end of my senior year to find a girl here, and then I didn't get past first base. I was not and am not a Casanova, but when I turned 25 and had just graduated from law school, women began to look at me very differently. Unfortunately, by then, I was already hooked. Doris had a hold of me and wouldn't let go. If you look at my situation, these were 2 sides of the same coin. When Doris wanted me, I was expected to comply. Now that she was looking for someone else, I was asked and expected to step back into line, allowing her to have the freedom I had been denied. Strange, but I could see the logic. Doris sacrificed far more than I did for our marriage. She made it work, she raised the next generation, and if it had been left to me, we probably would never have had children, bought a house, planned for retirement, or contributed anything at all. Now Doris wanted a little of what she considered harmless fun, a little of what she was missing. She did not refuse me this opportunity, she simply did not believe that I could take advantage of the offer. You see, I'm old and fat. My mom's good intentions today were to make me see my limitations but reassure me that they all still love me and will make this as easy as possible for me. They were kind as they thought, but I behaved like an egoist. In a way, I knew all along that it would come to this. I'm not blind or stupid, but Mom and Doris are right in many ways. I'm still a child. Unfortunately, I didn't stay as a child. I'm spoiled. I saw the game being played and got down in the mud to play, lying to myself that I was doing it for the sake of others or that it was necessary. This is wrong. I cheated because I wanted to win more for the sake of winning than for the money. Losing to Doris would be a loss, and I've been losing to Doris for 20 years. When I parked in the parking lot, I took out my iPad and opened the spyware. He's nowhere in the house, and Mommy's car is gone, I heard my daughter Beth say. If I'm lucky, he won't come back, I heard Larry's wife, and comment. I always knew and didn't like me, but now she had a reason. And is a real hottie. She wasn't what you'd call a beauty, but she exuded hottest and had what was called a bedroom voice and the flirtatious mannerisms that went with it. I understood why Larry Jr., who is not the sharpest tool in the shed, married her, but it was a stupid move. This woman was essentially broadcasting her infidelities. Larry ignores his wife's not-so-subtle gossip and rather egregious behavior. My brother-in-law worked as a vice president at his family's bank. It was obvious nepotism but quite acceptable in that industry. His fat salary and social position ensured that, no matter how hard and played, she always returned home for a comfortable lifestyle. And Larry had a 5-year-old son who had the same blonde hair and blue eyes as his supposed father. As a couple, they always seemed to get along. Now, as I listen, my mother hatched a plan. My son is more than stubborn, he practically called me a traitor to my face, my mother told her listeners. I don't believe it, said my mother-in-law. Dave is too good a person for that. It's hard for me to believe this, but I heard what I heard. He seems to somehow know everything. The old people must have been careless in their words, and he took everything out of context, explained dear old mother. What should we do? I don't want to lose my husband, said Doris. We have to be smarter. If he doesn't want to go voluntarily, we have to use some trick, my mother said. I don't know, we shouldn't underestimate my brother. He was always cunning, not the smartest but the most cunning. Remember what he did to Uncle Jack during the poker game? He can be very cunning, I heard my sister say. She was referring to the time when, as a teenager, I discovered that my uncle cheated quite often at our bi-weekly poker games. Everyone knew about it but did nothing because we were playing for pennies. Still, I didn't feel good about being tricked, so I figured out how he stacked the deck when he shuffled and cheated him back for several weeks. He lost constantly but could not expose me without exposing himself. The games ended abruptly, and my uncle stopped talking to me. My sister remembered this because she asked me what Uncle Jay's problem was, and I laughed when I told her. Yes, but he has a weakness that we can exploit, my mother said. She then laid out her scheme. The weakness she was talking about was my inability to tolerate alcohol. I don't drink, but I'm a happy drunk until I fall asleep. Give me enough alcohol, and I'll pass out. Mom's plan was simple, get me drunk at a family party on New Year's Eve. While they are refilling my drinks, and will be approaching me when I'm happy with my drink. She'll start making explicit suggestions that I'll definitely remember when I'm sober. When I'm so drunk that I don't understand what's happening and therefore don't remember, they would take me upstairs to the bedroom and undress me. They took several without clothes photos of and me, and in the morning, I would wake up and find myself in someone else's bed, and an angry wife standing in front of me. When I am presented with evidence of my infidelity, I will hardly be able to object to my wife's proposal to open our marriage to others. Of course, opening our marriage would mean that Doris would have the right to play while I stayed at home. The stumbling block was Anne's reluctance to have a night with what she called the fat old man. The general consensus was that I had no intimate appeal. And was the best choice since Larry was a good friend of mine, the guilt factor would have been magnified. And in the end, she didn't have to do anything other than get some photos to help with the scheme. So they chose my brother Samuel's wife, Elaine. She was a timid little thing who was afraid of her shadow. She was brought into the plan because of her desire to fit in. She was also the perfect witness, being the newest member of the family, married to my brother for only 2 years and currently pregnant. From the front seat of my wife's expensive car, I looked out over the northern Catskills, where Washington Irving staged Rip Van Winkle. It's a strange sight in the winter fog, breaking through the dark mountains to the east. The Hudson River shines silver. It's a good place for an Irving folktale, but not a place to listen to your marriage die. But then Doris spoke. We have to give Dave another chance, more time, she said. What about Mark? Will he wait? Asked her mother. Mark is very worried. We're both off work this week, and it's the perfect time to, as he puts it, rent a room. However, I need my David. He's my first and true love. I'm going to talk to him. He has never denied me anything, and I can't imagine him completely denying me this. He and I must come to an understanding, she said. Listen, my plan will work. He is harsh, but your husband deserves it with his attitude. I suggest you talk a little more, but be careful not to keep your lover waiting because of my stupid son, my mother said. I'll give Dave one more try to get him to step forward, Doris said, ending the conversation. I had no choice but to go back and sit at Christmas dinner with my family. I received a very cool reception from everyone except Anne, who had apparently resigned herself to flirting with the fat old man. Doris grabbed me and pulled me out the door to her Mercedes. What about Christmas dinner? I asked. We won't go back there, we need to talk, she said. Is there anything to talk about? I asked. Yes, but not in the car, she smiled slightly. She went to the Hilton, she called ahead and made a reservation, and when we got there, a bottle of White Star champagne was waiting for us. You remembered, I said. How could I forget? It was, after all, my first time. This is the last time, no, if it can be avoided. Please, Dave, talk to me. What is there to talk about, she said, moving closer to me, throwing her arms around my neck and pulling me into a lingering kiss. From there, it was a short step to a huge king-size bed. When she finally let me go, she wanted to talk. What's wrong, love? She asked. What could be wrong? I replied. Oh, please, stop it. It's not us. I love you and always will. I want to be with you always, until death do us part, as we promised. By abandoning everyone else, you know that I can never love another, she said. Yes, love, no, she said. Is there a difference? I asked. Certainly. I'm trying to convince you that we will remain together forever and inseparable, she said. You can keep a bird in a cage, but don't leave the door open. What does it mean? I asked. I offer each of us freedom because we love each other. This is what binds us. I will not fly away, she said. Please don't. You believe me? I asked. I believe, but you are mistaken, she replied. No, believe me. I can only love you, she said. I didn't have an answer. She missed the point by failing to understand the other side. Please, don't let male pride hurt us. We are only talking about bodily function, it doesn't mean anything, Doris pleaded. Doris, please believe me. This is an argument you cannot afford to win. Be happy with what you have, and I will stick to my opinion. Just don't open the door, don't be stubborn. You know that I will always take care of you, just like before, you need me. Don't be stupid, she said. I hugged her, realizing that we might not have a future. She couldn't understand that we were basically all lying. Yes, the lie was an oversight on my part, an inability or failure to tell the unpalatable truth. I spent 19+ years avoiding the central issue in our marriage until Doris believed the original lie she told herself and which I never challenged. Oh, I love you. Everything will be fine, trust me, she said, not realizing that the problem was not her. No, believe me. I will never accept what you offer. I kept my end of the deal, I said, ending the call. On Wednesday of the following week, Mark invited my wife over for dinner. I listened long enough to be convinced that they had done the deed to end my marriage. Apparently, by some mutual agreement, the loving couple did not mention the cuckolded husband. It was as if I didn't exist. Friday was New Year's Eve. I started drinking at my favorite place, Irish Fog. This is a restaurant bar. I invited all my old friends over for drinks, but none of my family. I myself stayed strictly with non-alcoholic drinks. I arrived at Larry Jr.'s house only at 8 p.m. and then by taxi. My old Honda had been parked earlier that day some distance from Larry's house and hopefully went unnoticed. When I arrived, I smelled like the bar I'd been in for most of that day, and I was acting a little worse than usual. Soon, they brought me a very strong drink. They started out slow but quickly increased their alcohol levels. I had a hell of a time getting rid of them, but luckily, Ann and Larry believe in houseplants. They and a few trips to the bathroom allowed me to stay sober while I acted like a drunk. And asked me to dance, and without waiting for an answer, she lifted me to my feet and began to rub herself against me. I let her do whatever she wanted, and after a while, I responded as drunk as I could. Apparently, this happened about half an hour after the ball dropped in Times Square, by which time I was already pretending to be completely intoxicated. This must have been convincing because Ann and Elaine took my hands and began helping me up the stairs. Having reached the bedroom, which I took to be a guest room, they threw me on the bed, "Take off his clothes while I undress, and then you can take photos," and said to Elaine. I let Elaine begin, and she rather hesitantly undid the buttons on my shirt and took it off. "You know, he's not very fat. In fact, he's quite athletic," Elaine said. "It doesn't matter, just take his pants off," and said as she carefully lowered her dress onto the chair and let her hair down, standing in her nicely silk lingerie. While Elaine was trying to unbuckle my belt, I spoke. "I don't think I want you to do that unless Ann is going to have a night with this old, not very fat man," I said. Elaine jumped back, a look of surprise on her face. Damn, and squealed, "My sister warned you, but who listens in this family?" I said, "Now you two go downstairs and send here the traitor who calls herself my wife now." With these words, they ran out of the room, and stopping only to grab her dress. It seemed like a long time passed while I sat and listened to the commotion below. There were a few raised voices, but I didn't even try to eavesdrop. The eavesdropping part of this little drama was over. Eventually, Doris appeared at the bedroom door. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. "Yes, come in and sit down," I said in as soft and friendly a voice as possible under the circumstances. Doris sat up, and the tears began to flow. The flow of water ended when her nose began to run. She felt so sorry that she had made a terrible mistake by listening to others. "What do you regret, Doris? About wanting another man or about being in his bed last Wednesday in his apartment?" she screamed, and for the first time, I saw fear. "No, it's probably just that my mother's scheme didn't work, and now you're caught. Please, David, I love you. It doesn't mean anything. You have to believe it. I know you love me and will forgive me," she said. Perhaps she was a little deceived by how calm I was. "No, Doris, I don't." "Oh, please, David, forgive me and let us forget about this," she pleaded. "Oh, I forgive you, Doris. There's really nothing to forgive except a little deception. The problem is the rest. You see, I don't love you. I never have, and I probably never will," I confessed. "That's not what you mean, David. It's your anger talking," she said. I couldn't help but laugh. "Do I seem angry? Let me assure you that this is not the case. I have spent the last 19 plus years in this marriage. It wasn't all that bad, it was a gilded cage of sorts. But now the door is open, and I walk through it with gratitude to you for finally setting me free. David, please, that's not what you meant. I will not let you divorce me over such a small thing after so many years of love and devotion that I have given you. Do what you want, I'm leaving. I succeeded, you kept me on a leash because of guilt, and now I don't have it. You wanted an open marriage, and I am giving you the most open marriage possible, namely marriage without the burden of a husband," I declared. With these words, I stood up and began to leave. "What will you tell our daughters?" she asked, starting to get angry. "Farewell is all I will say to these traitors. I would like to believe that they are not mine, but considering what they are and what my mother is like, I have no doubt. So, goodbye is all I have for them and nothing more," I stated. Then I stopped and thought, that's not true. My girls are the little ones that I will always have. They are locked in my heart, they never grew there. They're still wondering if the ducklings will cross the road, I said. With these words, I left my crying wife and went down the stairs. Of course, my mother, supported by my father, tried to stop my departure. "Where are you going?" Mom demanded. "That's a good question, to which I don't have an answer, but I guess to places I haven't visited for 20 years, I said. "So you're just going to run away because life didn't go according to your plan?" she said. "No, I'm leaving to find life, the one I was missing," I replied. "Oh, please, David, be reasonable. Everything you have is here. Everyone who loves you is here. Everything we ever did was for you. Don't let stupid male pride ruin your life. You have no life without us. How will you live? Who will take care of you if you leave? There may be no turning back, son. Think about what this means. Doris has been good to you, we all know how addicted you are," my father said. "Sorry, but I already left, you just didn't notice. The key was in the lock, you just had to turn it," I said. With that, I kissed my mother tenderly on the cheek and left, waving widely to the others and firmly saying goodbye. I left my wife, daughters, brothers, sisters, and parents. I was free. There was one but, in fact, inside, I was always alone. But I would not be lonely for long. The older but not fat man had the greatest aphrodisiac in the world, money in the millions. Physical attractiveness. I would cash out and go to the most remote places I could find. I traded one old woman for as many young women as I could bear. I was released from prison after 20 years, and a new, different world awaited me. What do you think of our story today? I don't think the man should have made up things that didn't really happen. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. See you in the next videos.